In a quiet delta village where traditions ruled stronger than justice, a young widow named Adaora was forced to marry her dead husband's brother. The elders called it the will of the ancestors. But Adaora knew something was terribly wrong. What began as a painful widowhood ritual soon uncovered a chilling secret hidden for years. On the night the truth was revealed, the entire village would realize that sometimes the greatest evil hides behind the name of tradition. Before we enter the story, let us your thoughts on the comment section. Hit the like button, share, and don't forget to subscribe to this channel. Let's go there. Far beyond the busy towns of Delta State, where the asphalt roads slowly disappeared into dusty paths and narrow foot trails, there lay a quiet riverine village known as Umuede. Umuede was small, hidden among thick palm groves and tall raffia trees that danced gently with the wind from the river Ethiopia. The houses were built from red earth and roofed with rust-colored zinc sheets that glowed under the afternoon sun. Life in the village moved slowly, guided by the rhythm of farming seasons, fishing tides, and traditions that had been passed down for generations. In Umuede, the words of elders were stronger than written laws. The people believed their ancestors still watched over them from the spirit world. Every decision, whether marriage, farming, or conflict, was made according to the customs handed down through time. To question tradition was considered dangerous, even disrespectful to the spirits of the land. And yet, sometimes tradition carried shadows within it. Many years ago, on a bright morning filled with celebration, a young woman named Adaora arrived in Umuede as a bride. She came from another community called Ogbolu, a lively town several miles away across rivers and forests. Unlike Umuede, Ogbolu was larger and more open to change. Women there were known to speak their minds, and families often allowed widows to choose their own future. Because of this difference, Adaora's arrival in Umuede stirred quiet curiosity among the villagers. From the moment she stepped down from the wooden canoe that brought her across the river, people gathered to watch. She was strikingly beautiful, but her beauty was gentle rather than loud. Her skin shone like polished bronze beneath the sun, and her eyes carried a calm intelligence that made people pause when she spoke. But it was not only her beauty that caught attention. Adaora carried herself with quiet dignity. She greeted elders respectfully, kneeling slightly with her head bowed as custom demanded. She smiled warmly at the village women who came to welcome her, offering small gifts her family had prepared for the marriage. Whispers passed through the crowd. "She is polite," some women murmured. "She may fit into our ways after all," others added. Standing proudly beside her was the man who had brought her to Umuede. His name was Emeka. Emeka was the first son of Chief Okorie, one of the most respected men in the village. Tall, broad-shouldered, and soft-spoken, Emeka was known throughout Umuede as a hard-working farmer who treated people with kindness. Unlike many men his age who spent evenings drinking palm wine at the village square, Emeka preferred quiet work in his palm plantation and peaceful evenings with family. But the thing people admired most about him was his heart. He believed strongly in fairness and honesty. And when he met Adaora during a trading visit to Ogbolu 2 years earlier, he knew immediately that she was the woman he wanted to marry. Their love had grown slowly and sincerely. It began with simple conversations at the marketplace whenever Emeka visited Ogbolu to sell palm oil and cassava. Adaora's father owned a small stall there, and over time the two young people began sharing small jokes, long discussions, and shy smiles. What started as friendship quietly blossomed into something deeper. Eventually, Emeka approached Adaora's family with respect and seriousness. After careful discussions and traditional rites between both families, the marriage was approved. And that was how Adaora found herself stepping into a completely new world. The wedding ceremony in Umuede lasted 3 full days. Drums echoed through the village square, while women danced in colorful wrappers. Elders poured libations to honor the ancestors, asking them to bless the new union. Adaora was dressed in beautiful coral beads and bright traditional cloth, her hair decorated with tiny golden ornaments that shimmered whenever she moved. As she danced beside Emeka, under the watchful eyes of the community, something peaceful settled in her heart. Perhaps this new village would truly become her home. And for a while, it did. After the celebration ended, Adaora moved into Emeka's family compound, a spacious piece of land surrounded by palm trees and yam barns. Life quickly found its rhythm. Each morning before the sun fully rose, Adaora woke to the sound of roosters crowing across the village. She swept the compound clean, prepared warm pap for breakfast, and joined Emeka on the path leading to their farm. The farm was one of the largest in Umuede. Rows of cassava stretched across the fertile soil, while tall palm trees stood proudly in clusters, their fronds swaying gently overhead. Emeka patiently taught Adaora the farming methods used in the village. He showed her how to identify healthy cassava stems, how to harvest palm fruits, and how to dry them properly for oil extraction. Though farming in Umuede was different from what she knew in Ogbolu, Adaora learned quickly. Soon villagers began noticing something remarkable. The young bride was hardworking. Even the older women who had first watched her with suspicion began to admire her dedication. She greeted everyone kindly. She helped elderly neighbors carry firewood. During village festivals, she joined other women in preparing meals for the entire community. Little by little, the village that had once seen her as a stranger began to accept her. But what truly made people admire Adaora was the love she shared with Emeka. Their marriage was built on respect. In the evenings, after returning from the farm, they often sat together under the large mango tree beside their house. Adaora would cook delicious meals while Emeka repaired farming tools or told stories about the history of Umuede. Sometimes they laughed so loudly that neighbors passing by would smile. People began saying something unusual. Emeka married well. Even Chief Okori, who had once worried about his son bringing a wife from another community, slowly grew fond of Adaora. He saw the way she cared for his son. He saw the peace that filled their home, and in his old age, nothing pleased him more than watching that happiness. For 3 years, life in Umuede remained calm. The seasons passed like gentle waves. Harvest festivals came and went. Weddings were celebrated. Children were born. The river continued flowing as it had for centuries. And within their compound, Adaora and Emeka lived in quiet contentment. Sometimes they spoke about the future. They dreamed of building a larger house. They talked about the children they hoped to have someday. To anyone watching, their life seemed blessed. But life often hides storms behind peaceful skies. One evening, during the peak of the rainy season, Emeka returned from the farm looking unusually tired. At first, Adaora thought it was only exhaustion, but that night he began to shiver with fever. By morning, his body was burning with heat. Adaora rushed to call the village herbalist. Medicinal leaves were boiled, sacred prayers were spoken, but Emeka's condition worsened. Day after day, the sickness grew stronger. Soon he could barely speak. Fear slowly spread through the compound. Neighbors gathered outside the house, whispering anxiously. Adaora barely slept. She sat beside her husband day and night, holding his hand, wiping sweat from his forehead, praying desperately for him to recover. But the sickness showed no mercy. Then, one quiet morning before sunrise, Emeka's breathing slowly stopped. The man who had brought Adaora into Umuede, the man who had promised to walk beside her through life, was gone. The cry that escaped Adaora's throat echoed across the entire compound. Villagers rushed in as she collapsed beside her husband's body. Tears flowed freely. Even the strongest men lowered their heads in sorrow. Umuede had lost one of its kindest sons. But as Adaora wept over the lifeless body of the man she loved, she did not yet realize something terrifying. Her grief was only the beginning. Because in Umuede, when a husband dies, the widow's true trial begins. The morning sun rose slowly over the village of Umuede, but inside Chief Okori's compound, darkness still lingered like a heavy cloud. The compound that had once been filled with laughter and the cheerful voice of Emeka now echoed with sorrow. Women sat quietly under the shade of the mango tree, whispering prayers and words of comfort. Some fanned the air gently, while others rubbed Adaora's back as she sat on the bare earth, her face swollen from endless tears. In Umuede, grief did not end with crying. There were traditions, and traditions demanded obedience. 3 days had passed since Emeka's burial. According to the customs of the land, the mourning rituals for a widow must begin immediately after the burial rites were completed. Before dawn that morning, the elder women of the village arrived. They came dressed in dark wrappers and serious expressions, carrying calabashes filled with herbs and black mourning cloths. Among them was Mama Ore, the oldest widow in the village and the woman responsible for guiding new widows through the strict customs of mourning. Without speaking much, they gently lifted Adaora from the ground where she had been sitting since the night before. Her once beautiful hair was loosened and roughly cut short, as tradition demanded. The women removed her bright clothing and replaced it with a plain black wrapper that hung loosely around her body. One of the women tied a thin rope around Adaora's waist. It was a symbol of widowhood, a symbol that told the entire village she now belonged to the spirits of mourning. Adaora sat silently while the rituals continued. Her heart was too broken to protest. Mama Ure looked at her with tired eyes. "Daughter," she said quietly, "these customs may seem harsh, but they have guided our people for generations." Adaora said nothing. She simply lowered her head. But deep inside her heart, confusion stirred. The widowhood customs in her home community of Ogbolu were different. Women mourned their husbands, yes, but they were not stripped of dignity or forced into suffering. Still, she reminded herself that she was now part of Umuede. Perhaps this was simply their way of honoring the dead. The rituals lasted until midday. Afterward, Adaora was led into a small hut near the back of the compound, where widows were expected to remain during their mourning period. The hut was dark and poorly ventilated, its mud walls cracked from years of neglect. She was told she must remain there for 7 days. She could only come out when summoned by the elders. Food would be brought to her once each day, and during that time, she must not bathe in the river or greet anyone openly. It was meant to prove her innocence, because in Umuede, there was a troubling belief. Whenever a man died suddenly, people sometimes suspected the widow. Some believed a wife might secretly cause her husband's death through witchcraft or jealousy. To remove such suspicion, the widow had to endure strict rituals that demonstrated her innocence before the community. Adaora knew she had nothing to hide, but the thought that anyone could suspect her of harming Emeka filled her with quiet pain. She loved him more than her own life, yet tradition did not consider feelings. Tradition only demanded obedience. Late that afternoon, while Adaora sat quietly in the dim hut, she heard footsteps approaching. Moments later, a young boy appeared at the doorway. "The elders are calling you," he said. Adaora slowly stood up. Her body felt weak, but she followed the boy toward the village square. By the time she arrived, a large gathering had already formed. Men sat on wooden stools arranged in a semicircle beneath the ancient Udala tree, where village decisions had been made for generations. At the center of the gathering sat the Council of Elders. Their faces were stern and unreadable. Leading them was Elder Ogbodo, the oldest and most influential man in Umuede. His beard was long and white, and his eyes carried the authority of someone whose words had shaped the village for decades. Beside him sat Elder Naji, a sharp-tongued man known for defending traditions fiercely. Other respected elders sat quietly beside them. As Adaora approached, murmurs rippled through the crowd. Some villagers looked at her with sympathy. Others watched with curiosity. She stopped a few steps before the elders and knelt respectfully. Elder Ogbodo cleared his throat. "Adaora, wife of Emeka." He began slowly. "Yes, father," she replied softly. The elder rested both hands on his carved staff. "You came into Umuede as a stranger, but you are accepted as a daughter of this land when you married our son. Adaora nodded silently. Now, he continued, our son has returned to the ancestors. The words felt like fresh wounds in her chest, but tradition must guide what happens next. Adaora lifted her head slightly. She sensed something important was coming. Elder Naji leaned forward. A murmur spread through the crowd. Many villagers already knew the custom, but hearing it spoken aloud made Adaora's heart tighten. Elder Ugbodo continued calmly. This practice ensures the family name does not disappear. The land, the farm, and the household remain within the family. Adaora swallowed slowly. She understood the meaning of his words. Her husband had a younger brother. His name was Chike. Chike sat quietly among the crowd, leaning against a wooden post. His eyes watched Adaora carefully, but there was no sadness in his expression. Instead, there was something else, something unsettling. Adaora gathered courage before speaking. With respect, fathers, she said gently, in my community, a widow is allowed to decide her own future. The elders exchanged glances. Elder Naji's voice hardened immediately. This is not Agbolu. He pointed his staff towards the ground. This is Umuede. The crowd fell silent again. Another elder spoke. If you refuse this marriage, people will begin to question how Emeka died. Gasps rippled through the women standing nearby. The meaning behind those words was dangerous. It was a threat. Adaora felt her heart pound. Father, she said carefully, I loved my husband. Then honor his family, Elder Ogbodo replied. The marriage will take place in 7 days. Those words struck like thunder. Adaora's chest tightened, as if the air had suddenly become too heavy to breathe. 7 days. In 7 days, she would be forced to marry a man she did not love, a man whose eyes carried no kindness. But the elders had already made their decision. The meeting ended quickly. Villagers slowly dispersed, whispering among themselves. Some pitied Adaora. Others believed she should simply obey the customs of the land. As she walked back toward the mourning hut, the weight of the situation settled heavily on her heart. She had lost her husband. Now, she was losing her freedom. But something about the elders' behavior troubled her deeply. Their decision had come too quickly, too confidently. It felt less like tradition, and more like a plan already arranged. As night slowly covered the village, Adaora sat alone in the dark hut, staring at the small flickering oil lamp beside her. For the first time since Emeka's death, a strange thought crossed her mind. What if his death had not been natural? What if something darker was hiding behind the elders' insistence that she marry Chike? The thought sent a cold shiver down her spine. But as frightening as the idea was, it also awakened something powerful inside her, a quiet determination. If there was a secret behind her husband's death, she would uncover it, no matter what the elders said, no matter what tradition demanded. Ogbolu, if she refuses, the village will accuse her of killing Emeka. Adaora's breath caught in her throat. The accusation they had hinted at earlier was not empty. Chike spoke again, his voice now colder. Good. After everything we did to remove him, the land must not slip out of our hands. Adaora felt the ground beneath her feet spin. Remove him. The words struck her like lightning. She pressed her hand against the tree trunk to steady herself. Surely she had misunderstood. But Chike continued speaking. That farm is worth too much. If Adaora leaves Umuede and returns to her people, she could claim the land. I will not allow that. Elder Ogbodo replied calmly. That is why the tradition exists. Once she becomes your wife, the land remains within the family. Adaora's mind struggled to process what she was hearing. Her husband's farm, the largest palm plantation in Umuede, a land many villagers secretly envied. Suddenly, every piece of the puzzle began falling into place. Emeka's sudden illness, Chike's eagerness to marry her, the elders' unusually quick decision, the threat accusing her of causing his death. It was not tradition guiding their actions. It was greed. Adaora felt tears rise in her eyes, but this time they were not tears of grief. They were tears of anger. Her husband had been murdered, and the men responsible were hiding behind the mask of tradition. Her heart pounded loudly as Chike's voice continued. Once the marriage is done, everything will belong to me. The farm, the palm trees, the house. And the widow? Elder Ogbodo asked. Chike laughed quietly. She will obey like every other woman in this village. The words sliced through Adaora's heart. For a moment, fear wrapped around her like a tightening rope. These men were powerful. They controlled the village council. If she openly accused them, no one might believe her. Worse still, they might punish her for disrespecting the elders. But then she remembered Emeka, his kindness, his honesty, the way he had treated everyone with fairness. He did not deserve to die because of greed. Adaora clenched her fists. She would not allow the truth to remain buried. The voices behind the hut slowly faded as the men walked away toward the center of the village. Adaora remained hidden for several minutes, her heart still racing. When she was sure they had gone, she quietly returned to the morning hut. The small oil lamp flickered weakly as she sat down on the raffia mat. Her mind moved quickly. If she wanted to expose them, she needed proof. Simply telling the villagers what she heard might not be enough. The elders could easily deny everything, and without evidence, the village might turn against her. Suddenly, another memory flashed in her mind. 2 days before Emeka's illness, he had shown her something strange, a small calabash container hidden beneath the wooden shelf in their room. Inside were dried herbs wrapped in cloth. Emeka had looked concerned when he found them. These herbs are not ordinary medicine, he had told her. I have never seen them in this house before. At the time, they both dismissed it as a mistake left by a visiting herbalist. But now Adaora realized the truth. Those herbs might have been poison. Slowly, a determined fire began to burn inside her heart. She would find that calabash, and if those herbs were truly poison, the entire village would know the truth. Outside, the moon continued its silent journey across the sky. But inside the dark hut, Adaora was no longer a helpless widow. She was a woman preparing for battle, the battle for justice. And in only 4 days, the entire village of Umuede would witness a truth that had been hidden behind tradition for far too long. The 7th day arrived with a strange heaviness hanging over the village of Umuede. From the early hours of the morning, villagers could already sense that something unusual was about to happen. The air itself felt tense, as though the land was quietly waiting for an event that would shake its long-standing traditions. In the center of the village square, preparations for the widow inheritance ceremony had begun. The square lay beneath the ancient Udala tree, a massive tree whose roots twisted deep into the earth like the veins of the village's history. For generations, it had been the place where elders judged disputes, settled family matters, and performed sacred rituals. Today, it would witness something different. Wooden stools were arranged carefully in a semicircle beneath the tree. Clay lamps had been placed around the square, even though the ceremony would begin in daylight. It was a sign that the ritual might stretch until evening if necessary. Men gathered in small groups, whispering quietly. Women stood together under the shade of nearby huts, their eyes filled with curiosity and concern. Some pitied Adaora. Others believed she should simply accept the village custom and move forward with her life. But no one truly knew what was about to unfold. At the center of the gathering sat the Council of Elders. Elder Ogbodo sat proudly on the largest stool, his long white beard resting against his chest as he leaned on his carved staff. Beside him sat Elder Naji and the other council members, their expressions serious and commanding. Not far from them stood Chike. He wore a neatly wrapped white cloth tied across his shoulder, the traditional attire for a man preparing to claim his late brother's widow. His posture was confident, almost arrogant. To him, today marked the beginning of his victory. He had waited patiently for this moment. Soon the land, the house, and the palm plantation would belong to him. Soon, Adaora would become his wife, whether she wished it or not. The drums began to beat slowly. Boom, boom, boom. The rhythmic sound echoed across the village like the heartbeat of tradition itself. Then the crowd parted as Adaora approached. She walked slowly toward the center of the square, escorted by the elder women responsible for guiding widows through the ritual. She still wore the plain black wrapper of mourning, but something about her presence had changed. Her shoulders were straight, her eyes were steady, and beneath the calm expression on her face burned a quiet strength that many villagers noticed immediately. She knelt respectfully before the elders. The drums fell silent. Elder Ogbodo rose slowly, leaning on his staff. "People of Umuede," he announced, in a deep voice that carried across the square. "Today we gather to complete the sacred duty of our ancestors." The crowd responded softly. The elder continued, "Our son Emeka has joined the spirits, but his lineage must continue." He pointed toward Chike. "According to the customs of this land, his younger brother will take responsibility for his household and his widow." A murmur passed through the gathering. Some villagers nodded in agreement. Others looked uncertain, but no one openly challenged the elder's authority. Elder Naji stepped forward. "Let the widow rise," he commanded. Adaora slowly stood. The entire village watched her. "Do you accept this marriage in honor of the traditions of Umuede?" Elder Naji asked firmly. For a moment, silence filled the square. Adaora looked around. She saw the women who had comforted her during her mourning. She saw farmers who had once worked alongside Emeka. She saw children who had admired his kindness. And then she looked directly at Chike. His eyes held the confidence of a man who believed the outcome was already decided. Adaora took a slow breath. Then she raised her hand. "Wait!" The single word echoed through the silent square. A ripple of surprise moved through the crowd. Elder Ogbodo frowned. "What is it, daughter?" Adaora's voice remained calm. "If I must accept this marriage," she said carefully, "then the village must first hear something important." The elders exchanged uneasy glances. Elder Naji's voice sharpened. "This is not the time for unnecessary words." But Adaora stood firm. "It is about my husband's death." The crowd immediately erupted into whispers. Women covered their mouths. Men leaned forward, suddenly interested. Even the elders shifted slightly in their seats. Elder Ogbodo raised his staff. "Speak quickly," he said. Adaora stepped forward into the center of the square. "For many nights I believed my husband's death was a tragedy sent by the spirits," she began. Her voice trembled slightly, but she forced herself to continue. "But 3 nights ago, I discovered something that changed everything." Chike shifted uneasily. Adaora reached into the cloth bag tied around her waist. From it, she slowly removed a small calabash container. The crowd leaned closer. "This was hidden inside my husband's room," she said. She opened the calabash carefully. Inside were dried herbs, wrapped in faded cloth. "I later learned these herbs are used to prepare poison." Gasps spread across the square. Elder Naji stood abruptly. "Where did you get such lies?" Adaora did not look at him. Instead, she turned toward the crowd. "My husband drank palm wine brought by Chike the night before he fell sick." The murmuring grew louder. Chike's face began to tighten. "But that is not all," Adaora continued. 3 nights ago, I overheard a conversation. Now the square was completely silent. She slowly pointed toward Elder Ogbodo. "And Chike." The elder's eyes widened slightly. "I heard them speaking behind my father-in-law's storage hut." Her voice grew stronger. "I heard them say Emeka had to be removed, so his land would remain in the family." The entire village erupted into chaos. "What? Impossible! Did she say poison?" Voices rose everywhere. Elder Ogbodo slammed his staff on the ground. "Silence!" But the damage had already been done. Every eye turned toward Chike. Sweat rolled down his forehead. Adaora stepped closer to him. "You told the elder that once I became your wife, the land would belong to you." Chike's breathing grew heavy. The crowd waited. The silence became unbearable. Then suddenly Chike shouted, "Yes!" The word exploded into the air like thunder. The entire square froze. Chike pointed wildly at Elder Ogbodo. It was his idea, he cried. He said the land was too valuable to leave the family. The villagers stared in shock. We only wanted to scare Emeka, Chike continued desperately, but the poison was stronger than we expected. A wave of horror swept through the crowd. Women began wailing. Men shouted angrily. The truth had finally been revealed. The respected elder, the younger brother, both had hidden behind the shield of tradition to commit a terrible crime. And now, before the entire village, the mask had been torn away. Under the ancient Udala tree, where justice was meant to live, the darkness within Umuede had finally been exposed. For several moments after Chike's confession, the village square of Umuede stood frozen in stunned silence. The ancient Udala tree, which had witnessed generations of judgments and ceremonies, now stood over a crowd struggling to understand the shocking truth that had just been revealed. Then the silence broke. Voices erupted everywhere at once. What did he say? Poison? They killed Emeka? Women gasped in horror. Some began to cry loudly, covering their mouths with trembling hands. The older men stared at Chike and Elder Ogbodo with disbelief, as though the ground beneath their feet had suddenly shifted. The man who had been respected as the guardian of tradition, the elder whose voice had guided the village for decades, had been part of a terrible crime. Adaora stood quietly in the center of the square. Her hands trembled slightly, but her face remained calm. For the first time since Emeka's death, she felt a strange mixture of pain and relief. The truth was no longer hidden. Chike's desperate words continued pouring out. Yes, we did it, he shouted again, panic filling his voice. I only wanted the land. Elder Ogbodo said the tradition would protect us. The crowd roared with anger. Several young men rushed forward and grabbed Chike before he could move. They held him tightly as he struggled. You killed your own brother, one man shouted. Monster, another yelled. Meanwhile, all eyes slowly turned toward Elder Ogbodo. The once powerful elder sat stiffly on his stool, his wrinkled hands gripping his carved staff so tightly that his knuckles turned pale. For years, people had bowed their heads when he spoke. Now, the same people stared at him with burning anger. Elder Naji stood up quickly, his face pale with shock. Ogbodo, he whispered, almost unable to believe what he had heard. The elder remained silent. Finally, one of the village's oldest women, Mama Ure, stepped forward. Her voice trembled with sorrow. Is this true? Elder Ogbodo slowly lifted his head. His eyes, once proud and commanding, now looked tired and defeated. For a long moment he said nothing. Then, in a quiet voice that barely carried across the square, he spoke. The land was too valuable, he murmured. Gasps rippled through the crowd. I believed it should remain in the family, he continued slowly. Emeka was stubborn. He spoke too often about fairness, about changing old customs. Adaora felt a sharp ache in her chest. Even in death, her husband's kindness had threatened those who benefited from injustice. Elder Ogbodo sighed deeply. I only meant to frighten him, to make him weak so Chike could control the farm. But the poison, he paused, it was stronger than we expected. A deep cry of anger erupted from the villagers. The truth was now undeniable. Emeka had not died from illness. He had been murdered. And the men responsible had hidden their crime behind the shield of tradition. For the first time in living memory, the authority of the Council of Elders was shaken. A tall young farmer named Obinna, who had once worked closely with Emeka, stepped forward. His voice rang across the square. This council has failed our village. Many villagers nodded in agreement. The customs meant to protect us were used to hide evil, he continued. Justice must be done. The crowd responded with loud approval. Elder Naji looked around nervously. The power of the elders was fading quickly. Finally, the remaining council members stood together and made a decision. Chike and Elder Ogbodo will face judgment before the entire village, one elder announced. The villagers gathered again beneath the Udala tree, but this time the authority of the old council had been replaced by something different. The voice of the people. Witnesses stepped forward. Adaora spoke clearly about the conversation she had overheard. Others confirmed Chike's greed for the plantation. Even the village herbalist examined the herbs inside the calabash and confirmed they were deadly poison plants. By sunset, the verdict was clear. Chike and Elder Ogbodo were guilty. The punishment in Umuede for such betrayal was severe. They would be banished from the village forever. Their names would never again be spoken in village meetings. And they would lose all claim to the land they had killed to possess. When the judgment was announced, the square fell quiet. Chike collapsed to his knees, begging for mercy. But the villagers turned away. The crime was too terrible. Before nightfall, the two men were escorted out of Umuede by several young warriors. They disappeared down the long forest path that led away from the village, and they were never seen again. But their punishment was not the only change that day. As the crowd slowly returned to the village square, people began speaking about something even deeper: the tradition that had nearly destroyed Adaora's life. For generations, widows had been forced to marry their husbands' brothers. Many women had accepted the custom in silence. Some had suffered quietly. Now the villagers began to question it. A respected fisherman named Pa Efe stood before the gathering. "If this tradition allowed such evil to happen," he said thoughtfully, "then perhaps it is time to change it." Murmurs of agreement spread quickly. Even some elders nodded slowly. For the first time in Umuede's history, the villagers agreed to abolish the practice of forced widow inheritance. From that day forward, widows would have the freedom to choose their own future. When the announcement was made, many women wiped tears from their eyes. Adaora stood quietly, overwhelmed by the moment. What had begun as a fight for her own dignity had become something much larger, a change that would protect many women after her. As the sun slowly disappeared behind the palm trees, the village turned toward Adaora. Obinna stepped forward again. "Emeka's land belongs to his rightful family," he said, "and the woman who fought for truth deserves justice." The villagers nodded. Adaora was officially granted full ownership of Emeka's farm and home. No one would ever force her into marriage again. Years passed. The palm plantation flourished under Adaora's care. She became known throughout the surrounding communities as a woman of courage and wisdom. Travelers who passed through Umuede often heard the story of the widow who stood alone against powerful elders, the woman who refused to let tradition bury the truth. And every time the story was told beneath the shade of the ancient Udala tree, the elders reminded the younger generation of an important lesson. Tradition should protect the people, not destroy them. Because the night Adaora exposed the truth, Umuede learned something that would guide them forever. Some traditions must change so that justice can live. Tradition is meant to guide and protect a community, not to silence truth or justify injustice. When people blindly follow customs without questioning their purpose, evil can hide behind sacred practices. Courage is often found in those who dare to speak when everyone else is silent. Adaora's bravery reminds us that truth may be delayed, but it cannot remain buried forever. Justice begins the moment someone refuses to accept wrong as normal. From that day forward, the story of Adaora was told across many villages in Delta. It became a reminder that wisdom does not always sit with age, and truth can rise from the voice of a single brave heart. The ancient Udala tree of Umuede still stands today, but the people remember the night a widow changed their future. Because sometimes, one act of courage is enough to break generations of silence. This is Ebubim Tales, where you're entertained with undiluted folktale stories. As you glued to this channel, make sure to hit the like button, share, comment, and subscribe to this channel.